Well, can I just welcome everybody? My name is Del Lowenthal, and I chair this Southern Association for Psychotherapy and Counselling, SAFPAC, starting to call ourselves SAFPACers. I don't know if it's a good idea or not. But we run a critical existential analytic psychotherapy training, a UKCP training, and once a month we invite a speaker and we open up that to other people. So welcome all the other people here, as well as the people who are normally here on a Thursday. As I say, it's a critical existential analytic psychotherapy training. We're particularly interested in phenomenology, you know, what emerges in the between, or however you like to look at it, whatever that is. We start off this term looking at more, but not exclusively, in terms of the implications of existentialism. And then we follow it looking at psychoanalysis, and then what we call critical psychotherapy. And I'm really so pleased to be able to introduce Manu Bazzano. I'm sure lots of you are here. Well, you're here because it's Manu, and he's actually this evening going to be talking about where it was, others shall be, desire, otherness, and the alien inside. So I would ask you if you could just mute your mics. We've got from now until 7:30, so there'll be time for questions and what have you. But I'm so pleased to say Manu is also an honorary fellow, which we're delighted, of SAFPAC. And so over to you, Manu.
Thank you, Dal. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and making the time for this exploration. How long have I got?
Well, we've got 1 hour and 23 minutes to include conversations, questions as well. Over to you, how you want to manage that.
Okay, I'll try and keep it concise. So, good to see you all. And this is work in progress for me. And the first part of it is, a lot of it has to do about deviation and distraction and being led astray. The word for it is also seduction, to be led astray, seducere. I'm assuming you can all hear me, okay? And the very nature of the introduction to this topic is such that I got mightily, royally distracted, and I got so much material that I have enough for a 3-year intensive course on the topic. And I want to start, okay, you know, the title is a kind of variation on Freud, almost sort of pre-Socratic formula, wo es war, soll ich werden. Where it was, there I shall be. And I want to begin by describing 4 events. And the first few are a sort of introduction to this. Okay. The first one comes from the 12th canto of Homer's Odyssey. The sorceress Circe tells Ulysses, be careful when in your next part of the journey you go close to an island. It's a dangerous place because there are sirens in there.
Being educated by an existential psychotherapist at the same time as giving me a journey back.
Sorry, Lynn, can you switch your iPhone off, please? Thanks.
Can I switch what, sorry?
We're hearing your phone.
Sorry.
Thanks.
No, I thought it was a siren's call, but it didn't sound very melodious. Anyway, so be careful when you go there. And of course, you being Ulysses, you know, you will want to hear the, you know how the story goes. Shall I go through it?
Yeah, go through it.
You want to hear this, you will want to hear the song of the sirens. So what you do is cover all your sailors' ears with wax, get tied to a mast, and to make sure that when you hear the song, you won't plunge into the waters. And if you scream and want to be freed from the ropes that hold you to the mast, instruct the sailors beforehand to tie them even tighter. So Ulysses hears the song of the sirens. He defeats the sirens, and as a result, the sirens, who are, by the way, half bird, half women. The fish came later. They were winged hybrid creatures. He gets to hear the song. He alone, alongside one of the Argonauts, in another clever boy expedition by Jason with the Argonauts, a name called Bute, another name from the Italian, so I'm not sure what you translate this. This other gentleman also heard the song, but nobody else does. And famously, the Emperor Tiberius asked, "Quid sirenes cantare sint solite?" What do they usually sing, the sirens? And nobody knows what the song is. What we do know from Circe is that the ones who hear the song will not go back home to husbands or wife and kids. They will have no longer a desire for that, will be led astray. The interpretation in the myth vary. The myth as such is plural. And that's the beauty of myth, that it becomes plural. Some say, and Maurice Blanchot among them, is that there is no proper song. There is a silence, which is the silence of distance, which in a strange way orients the sailor towards navigation. So it's a very, in itself, it would function as a mirage or as a temporary destination that creates the journey in the first place. Blanchot also reflects on the implied and implicit misogyny in having seen and interpreting the siren's call as a call to ruin. And even more interestingly, more poignantly, he says, what scares humans about hearing the siren songs is the fact that you might discover a song within them, and they might discover that the nature of this song is non-human to some level, is foreign to what we call the human experience. I want to happily get lost in that, but I will not get lost completely, but I want to linger a little bit longer to record a fact in the history, in the progression of the myth. Science became in many manifestations, statues in cemeteries or in various places, became custodians of the threshold. And there are funereal sirens. In some in some situations, like in Naples, they became one with images of saints, of women saints. But one episode in this history of the myth is very indicative. It has to do with the Saint Ambrose, Bishop of Milan, who came up with a striking image. In the same way as Ulysses was tied to the mast and resisted the call of the flesh, in the same way Christ, nailed on the cross, invites us to resist the call of a perishable sensual body, bloody blood. That was a real turning point in a long movement towards the rejection of paganism. And Ambrose was also famous for having, because some people had burned a synagogue, and then a local authority had instructed to rebuild the synagogue. Ambrose objected to it, saying that the beliefs of the Jews were inimical to Christianity. So the point I'm trying to make is that in the history of the myth, the demonization, you could say, of sirens became one with the dominance of Christianity through the Roman Empire and so forth. And he completely ignored and neglected the fact that even eminent philosophers not known for being particularly wild or heretic, like Pythagoras or Plato, always praised the sirens, down to Ovid, who has been a bit of an obsession of mine the last few. Ovid called the sirens wise, the wise sirens. Second episode, James Joyce, chapter 11 of Ulysses. The sirens in Ulysses Joyce are two barmaids, Miss Kennedy with golden hair and Miss Douce with bronze hair. And they are watching through the windows of the Ormond, bar of the Ormond Hotel as a procession goes by. And they enjoy the afternoon. It's 3:30 in the afternoon of the 16th of June. And they laugh at a man who is craning his neck to admire them because they're looking from the window. And a series of events happen during the Sirens episode in Joyce Ulysses. One of the protagonists, Leopold Bloom, is carrying a book called The Sweets of Sin, a present for his friend Molly. The Sweets of Sin is an erotic novel, and he will successfully seduce or commit adultery with Molly. At the same time, we learn that Bloom's wife is going to have sex that very day with Blazes Boylan. And Boylan will buy Molly violet silk petticoats for her birthday. Then all sorts of things happen. A piano tuner comes in, and another man comes in, and he starts improvising on a tune called Martha. And Martha is in itself a parody, in a sense. The story of a noble woman called Lady Harriet, who disguises herself as Martha and goes in the poor part of town and has a liaison with a a guy, with a gentleman, disappears for a few days, then returns to her life as an aristocrat. And one day she meets the man and rejects him. He's affronted by this, and eventually things become pacified and there is a happy ending. Why is this interesting? Why it's important? Because the whole chapter, I mean, Joyce being Joyce, you wouldn't expect a boring, straight narrative with a redemptive little moral thing at the end, in the end. But the whole chapter is operatic. You have the, it's musical, it's operatic. You have the introduction, the duets, the tenor, the trio, the quintet, and the most important thing, the fugue. I've been dabbling with music half of my life, but I neither can write music nor really understand it, whatever that means. No, I don't really know what a fugue is, but one definition of it is the most fully developed form of polyphonic writing. When I heard that, something clicked in my mind. Fugue, and it reminded me of Gilles Deleuze's line of flight. It is in fleeting, in following what a tendency within the human organism emerging, crossing through the individual. It is by following the line of flight that we create reality. Reality is not pre-existing, like truth is not something that can be revealed through aletheia, through the undecorous striptease of Heideggerian fame, but instead something that is built, it's created through a fugue, a line of flight. And I will come back to this. And this will be also important because of the notion of, for lack of a better word, taking off. That is important in psychotherapy. And I will get there eventually. But you see how easily distracted one can be when you deal with siren song. But the important conclusion I want to draw from this is the following. Ulysses, the hero, the man of knowledge, the man of science, is in fact a coward. He is not truly venturing and absorbing the transformative effect of hearing the songs of the siren. He comes back from the journey intact. He is venturing into the unconscious. He is done with the purpose of mining something that he can take home. Of course, the danger is real. So when he comes back from the meeting with the sirens, something becomes more stable and more secure, but also duller. And it's time to introduce the third event, the autumn equinox of 1897. Sigmund Freud writes a letter to his colleague, the Dr. Wilhelm Fliess, and essentially abandons his general theory of seduction. Troubled, understandably, by the fact that the implication of finding links between hysteria and sexual impropriety from the father or from the mother, usually from the father in relation to the daughter, was too hot a potato to be dealt with, to put it colloquially. So he abandoned the general theory of seduction. And those of you where the weekend workshop last week know, this was the beginning of Freud becoming distracted from the true, if I can put it that way, from the more exciting and subversive part of his new art that he created, psychoanalysis, and move away towards three deviations that have really marred and affected negatively the psychotherapeutic endeavor. The first one is the biological. And one of the effects of this we have seen with Klein, with Melanie Klein, where sexuality has been reduced to biology. And also the deviation towards biology has also emphasized excessively phylogenesis, a phylogenetic stream, so to speak, and has encouraged the idea that the unconscious is in a certain sense like the ground of our being, like something innate, biological, like a kind of a instinctual kernel at the center of the individual, in which case the individual becomes like a Russian doll that is somewhere in there, rather than, and I will get to that, an implantation, the presence of a foreign body at the core of the individual. The second deviation of distraction was language, and with Lacan, we have the illusion that, okay, there is a progress in Lacan in the sense that the unconscious is understood as not so much the ground of our being, but as a language that may or may not be decoded. And the thing is complex here, and I am in a way oversimplifying it. But the problem with language and with the structuralism of Lacan is that this is too neutral a position and ignores otherness. And I will get to otherness in a moment. And the third and final, and the one by which I think almost the entirety of the psychotherapeutic endeavor, all the entirety of the orientations is beset, is what became ego psychology, a fixation with the ego self and a complete forgetting of the unconscious. Fourth event to introduce was the Copernican revolution. So let's move away from the human, from psychic, and from experience, and let's look at the night sky. The view normally was, the orthodox view was that the earth is stand at the center. And Copernicus, picking up an ancient tradition, it went back to Aristarchus of Samos, 2nd century AD, stated that the earth is not the center. So the geocentric position was upset by the heliocentric position. a decentering of the earth. We are no longer at the center, which introduces vertigo in our experience, decenters us, and introduces infinity. Freud, who is, whether we like it or not, the initiator of this strange profession we are involved in, has started very promisingly by introducing a similar Copernican revolution in terms of the psyche, by decentering the ego self, saying, what I call me is not the center of my experience. The center of my experience is what he called the unconscious. And the hope was that this enterprise would continue. And the genius was that he had hinted at a methodology, as you all well know, that would be akin to the study of mental processes that are not really understandable or approachable by cognition. Processes over which we cannot gain mastery, which is incidentally what we're trying to do. And it's easy to critique CBT, but in fact, the positivist streak is alive and kicking in most psychotherapeutic orientations. Okay, very, very briefly, the tendency to redirect and finding one's ground, Ulysses wanting to listen to the song and not getting lost, is understandable, even though there is an innate imperialism at work in there. I want to hear it, I want to apprehend, I want to possess this experience rather than learning from it. In the same way as some people would use dream work to decode the language of dream so that I can have a better career, or I can meet the woman of my life. That's, so to speak, to to demote the importance of the learning, you see what I'm saying. The other hope, alongside, with Copernicus and Freud, was also Darwin. I mean, at first, Darwinian ideas were a shock. Oh my goodness, we are on the same continuum as animals. But this doesn't shock anybody anymore. And let's not forget, at the heart of Darwin's vision, there is still a sense of teleological, Christian teleology, that in a way sees man and woman as the top dogs, the very peak of creation. So the shock of Darwinism has been neutered, and man and woman, the human, is still at the very center. The shock of Copernicus is still being muted because we resist Einstein relativity. We appreciate it. We appreciate quantum physics, but it's more difficult to come to terms with the vertigo that this kind of ideas inspiring us. And it was lost with Freud. And I'm being slightly melodramatic in saying it happened in the autumn equinox of 1897. But it did happen around the time when he gave up the theory of general seduction. I owe this insight, this is not my insight, this is the insight of a brilliant psychoanalyst called Jean Laplanche, who was not only politically active in the left, not only translated, I don't know if he translated Freud, but certainly created a wonderful dictionary with Pontalis of Freud's terms and psychoanalysis, but revisited this concept of the general theory of seduction. A clarification. The general theory of seduction does not mean in any way, does not describe in any way or deal with the abusive, inappropriate impingement from a parent into the life of the child. Seduction here means induction into the world, to a redirection of the infant, of the one who cannot speak, infants, towards a world which is, you could say, enticing, vast, and mysterious as the night sky to a child. And the important thing, and I'm trying to, in a way, say in a succinct way, something so complex. But one way of seeing this is the important distinction between instinct and drive. And I'm trying to talk from within the psychoanalytic language to see how it can be critiqued and to a certain degree exploded, so that it can become, so that the potential, the subversive potential that is present in psychoanalysis can be clarified, so to speak. So instinct is everything that has to do with biological self-preservation and, to a certain extent, preservation of the species. And it's been extensively, competently covered by attachment theory, by John Bowlby, etc. So there is the nurture, there is the presence, the secure base, the connection between parent and child, which is geared towards the biological, instinctual need to preserve an organism, to continue, and to thrive. And then there is the drive. And the drive is an interesting one. And the drive builds up on the back of the instinct. It's not contrary to the instinct. The word would be trieb, drive in that sense. It's not inimical, opposite, or different in a sense, but on the back of the instinct, something else is growing that makes of the adult to be a more complex sexual being. In a way, a simple way to see this is the fact that we shouldn't forget, in other words, Laplanche invites us to consider the fact that alongside food, taking care of the child needs, something else is communicated by the mother and the father. And that is an enigmatic and compromised message. Enigmatic because the child doesn't understand it. He cannot understand it. He doesn't have language. They don't have language. And also because the parent themselves don't understand it. Because part of the experience of the parent is unconscious, and it's suffused with a complex sexuality that they themselves don't understand. And yet this enigma of the drive, of desire, let's give it its proper name, of desire, is transmitted. And the refocusing of psychotherapeutic attention to the enigmatic message would be crucial, because then we go back to the original purpose of our endeavor, working with psyche. The psychotherapy, it is not a human exploration. Psychotherapy is not about exploring the human experience. That's only a side track and its side effect. The genuine, direct exploration, according to this view that I am suggesting or engaging in a thought experiment with, the true object of the exploration is the enigmatic message. This is not archaeological work in the strict sense of the word. It's not going back to events and healing or understanding the nature of the relational attachment of the child to the parent. It is not a hermeneutic either. In fact, what I'm proposing is an anti-hermeneutics. This is not about redescribing, reinterpreting the past, re-understanding it so that it can be useful to the present. And it is not, again, I want to emphasize this, it is not relational. Instead, it's solely interested in what transpires, what is handed over from person to person, from parents to child, from a significant other to another significant other. It could be a person who's very dear to us, who may be dead, but whose enigmatic message is still within us and works through us. The communication of the enigmatic message of the parent to the child in the original scene of seduction is traumatic. Now, trauma has become a flourishing industry with his gurus. We are told the body keeps the score, which makes me ask, is the body a resentment machine? And there is this incredible emphasis on trauma. All the shortlisted books for the Booker Prize are about trauma. The winner of the Booker Prize is a story about trauma. Okay, I get it. Yeah, trauma is absolutely crucial. It's important. But I'm not talking about trauma in that sense, and I'm not belittling it either. The receiving of the enigmatic message is traumatic in the sense that it comes from the outside. It comes from an other. Philosophically speaking, what I'm trying to present is a post-phenomenological way to understand and redirect the foundations of psychoanalysis and then psychotherapy. By the way, I see psychoanalysis and psychotherapy as a continuum. I don't see them as two different churches anyway. So there is at the beginning an implantation of an enigmatic message. There is a siren's song which we may do well to pay attention to. That would be the idea. But being unconscious, it cannot be fully understood, apprehended, or decoded. And yet it is within us as an alien body, and it works through us. And by paying close attention and by, what's the word? A transfiguration, this enigmatic message can become our cultural message. Cultural in the wider sense of our own message, our own work and love in the world. Okay, here's another example. Something that clicked when I compared and contrasted Odysseus or Ulysses with another gentleman called Orpheus. And this is my suggestion, and it's work in progress, and I would be very welcome. You'll be very welcome to tell me what you think of it. So, approaching the silence, approaching otherness, approaching the enigmatic message of other is a dangerous enterprise. One way, and the way we have dealt with it in our profession, is Ulysses' way. Not only through evidence-based psychotherapy, not only through the positivist obsession with quantifying experience, measuring empathy, measuring, listen to this, measuring authenticity, whatever that means, and so forth, but also through an excessive importance given to cognition and to consciousness, I would say. So it has been the Ulysses way. I could have easily called this talk Anti-Ulysses, and maybe I should write something called Anti-Ulysses. And it's a pity because I'm struggling. I absolutely love Odyssey. And they had a wonderful, wonderful TV version when I was a child. And this was this old and blind poet called Ungaretti who would read the lines from Homer. So I'm still in awe of it. So in a way I'm saying, I get it. We do want to gain mastery. We do want to get cognition. We do want to get post-traumatic growth, some people call it. And I always think of courgettes, aubergine when I think of growth. Now, courgettes grow, but not human beings, for Christ's sake. But I get it. Building something after post-traumatic stress, you build post-traumatic growth. I want to gain mastery over a world that is violent, bewildering, mysterious, that I can't understand. I get it. But to only follow that rule brings us to where we are now in psychotherapy. A thoroughly dull profession that it is only interested in sending back people to their place, a reserved seat, Leonard Cohen would say, in the traffic jam. What good is that? What good would that do? Ronnie Lang would say, to make somebody functioning and becoming more or less so-called sane in a thoroughly fucked up world, what good would that be? So what I am saying is that, let me put it in starker term, by moralizing child care, by desexualizing child care, and by using it as a model for the way we relate. And by making attachment the only fundamental value on which all of the psychotherapeutic enterprises sheepishly agrees, we deprive the human subject of the capacity and the ability for desire, for sexual desire, and for transformation. By neutering the intensity, the mysterious early rapport with our parent, we deprive the subject of the possibility of transformation. Let me put it in another way. Mommy brings me food, and she's very loving. Mommy is also incredibly exciting. She has this body that moves and breathes. And mommy carries dreams in her, and a sexuality and ambivalence. And what is she saying to me? She's a mysterious being. If we deny that, and out of an understandable fear and terror of infantile sexuality, given the times we are in, I mean, what am I talking about? I can't even believe that I'm saying it. It's almost like, shut up. You will get done by the professional bodies, right? But by denying that mysterious dimension has to do with desire, we neuter the possibility of the adult, of accepting the possibility that the adult might be a person who is capable of transformation. And so why are you sex obsessed? What is it about sex? Well, sex, the way sex moves and manifests, illustrates very well the drive, what I'm trying to talk about. Also, it might well be that sexual desire is on one level the only drive, because it is not geared towards self-preservation. Yes, of course, children are born out of that, but that's a side effect. Sexual drive as an entirely different thing. And so, what am I saying? I'm saying that we have inherited in psychoanalysis, and then later on through phenomenology, through existential psychotherapy, but let's say through phenomenology essentially, a very complex body of work that moves like a braid. So one direction goes towards self, experience has to do with me, and the other direction goes towards the other. Why the other? Because, and here is the thesis that I am paraphrasing from Laplanche, the unconscious is a foreign body implanted in the heart of my being by the other. The unconscious is the very real presence of the other within me, not the ground of my being. It is not phylogenetic. It is not necessarily that if I manage to mind the unconscious, I will discover some archetype. I will discover the ground of my being. No, it's completely other and gives, for once, primacy to the other, because it is all very well to speak of otherness, to speak of accepting diversity, of accepting the radical ethical stance of, for example, we have inherited from Levinas and from people like that. But we are still, even when we talk of intersubjectivity, of relational psychoanalysis, relational psychotherapy, we are still talking about two monads, two atomized, separate beings relating to one another. We forget that at the heart of me, the heart of who I am, there is the other. What we call autonomy, to paraphrase something that Dale has often mentioned, at the heart of autonomy is heteronomy. So this would be one of the routes, one of the ways in which we can approach a deconstruction of the self. This is one of the ways in which the valuable lessons of post-structuralism can be used in our psychotherapeutic endeavor to realize that at the heart of me, there is no me. There is an implantation of an enigmatic message by the other. Again, I got sidetracked. That's the trouble when sirens become your muse. Okay, one way was Ulysses. I actively reject that view, not because I don't respect it, but because it's been played to death. There is another way. The other way is to perish, which is always a possibility. I mean, perishing often means it's the ego self that is afraid to perish. But yet another way is Orpheus. Orpheus is a mortal whose song can enchant and at times surpass the sirens. And Orpheus is the other person who can claim victory over the sirens. But he uses the same similar method. He also uses song and melody. In the same way as Joyce makes of his rendition of the sirens, he makes it into a musical thing, into a musical. And I'm actually tempted to sing myself right now. But I'm resisting the temptation. So one of the ways is to counteract the siren song with our own song to become Orpheus. Okay, what does it mean to become Orpheus? It has to do, and I'm coming slowly to a close because I want to have a good discussion. What does it mean? I was asking earlier. Okay, the task would be to respect the enigmatic message within me and to allow it to be manifested in the therapy room, let's say. And then the task would be to transfigure the message. One image I often have, because I used to be a musician, a songwriter or a composer, let's say, composer has composed this piece of music, she performs it. What was the inspiration? There was a vague sense of whatever it might be, of loss, of desire, and there she composed this piece of music. And then she performs it. And when I hear that song, or when you hear that song, that composition, that piece of music, that fugue, something in you he is touched. So let's say the ambivalent, enigmatic message has been implanted in you now. You carry it in you. You don't know what it is, but it has moved something in you. And now it's your turn to transfigure it and bring it into the world. That bringing it into the world, all the while not knowing exactly what it is, not having cognitive mastery over it, but having a sense of it, having a smell, a sense of the melody, a sense of the energy, let's say, to use the overused word. And that becomes your work in the world. And that would be Orpheus. You turn the traumatic, enigmatic message into your own song to the world, doing what you love to do, doing what you love to, call it actualizing. I don't care what you call it, but please don't call it authenticity, because it really pisses me off, that word. But okay, no, call it authenticity by all means, but it becomes your own way to continue this movement and this message, that then it become, or whatever, transgenerational. So it happens to traverse the human, but there is no fixation with the human. Of course, we respect the human, we respect the human experience, but psychotherapy is not about the human. There is a fundamentalist humanism at the heart of so many psychotherapeutic approaches, including avowedly secular approaches. What is Heidegger's Dasein but the reaffirmation of this humanist fundamentalism? Because how is Dasein expressed in the end? Like John Mackesy would say, by a bloke, a philosophy expert, who tells us that the language in which this privileged being is expressed has to be ancient Greek or German. Of course, because German is closer to the purity of being. And again, Joel Mackesy says, it's like favoring your mother's cooking. Okay, you love your mother's cooking, but you don't have to force it down the throat of everybody. And again, there is a fundamentalist humanism when we imagine, whatever our ideology, that there might be, and this is so typical of an orientation approach that I love passionately, the existential approach. There is a dream, an idea of an original human experience that has to be defended against the attack of, you name it, of cyborg, of the quantification of human experience. Well, there isn't such a thing. And frankly, I don't really care about the original human experience. Again, what I care about is this weird, enigmatic message that my mother gave me. My mother was a very exciting woman. She died young. She taught me how to swim. No technique. She just said, come with me. I went. I miss swimming. I know people who swim to this day, end of November. How do you do it? I don't know. But anyway, what matters to me is the message at the heart of my being communicated by my father, When as a boy, I would say to him, in the summer night, you say, look at the night sky. And I would ask questions about why the stars, why is that like that? Why, what does it mean? He would say, at some point he would be exhausted and tired by my question. He would say, I don't know, but look, it's so vast. And there's something really frightening about that. I am concerned also with the enigmatic message that important people in my life have implanted in me. And it's that is working through me. And it's that I'm interested. The human, Foucault says that the human is like something written on sand. The sea will wash it away. You can go on, I will go on creating this line and say, this is human and this is the rest of the world. Of course, I have to do that. But I wouldn't give it too much importance to this pristine Garden of Eden, human experience, authentic self, real self, that supposedly was there once upon a time when everything was hunky-dory and when all the fruit was organic and everybody walked around being incredibly holistic. It was never there in the first place. Derrida has taught us that. Time is out of joint. From the very beginning, we were split. Finally, what does it mean on one level, I'm not saying the implantation of the enigmatic, traumatic message is necessarily hunky-dory, necessarily a good thing. It is enigmatic and it is traumatic. And I would like to suggest with Judith Butler that it's there that gender assignment happens. It is not, and this is also Laplanche, it is not through the child identification with a particular gender, it's by identification by the parent who implants that message. And what does that mean? It means that, as Andrew Seed would be fond of saying, I believe he's here somewhere, the notion of the perverse polymorphous sexuality will have to be revived against the Oedipalization of experience that would tell us that there is this so-called natural move towards heterosexual direction, which can only be created by, and Lacan would agree with that, name of the father and the presence of the patriarchal order right there. Finally, before I stop, even though Freud has abandoned this dangerous subversive path, it continued to be there in disguise. You only have to go and read Totem and Taboo, 1912, for finding remnants of ideas of possession. He actually speaks of possession. And also you only have to look to the way then his view split into the pleasure principle and the death instinct. To me, following on the footsteps of Laplanche, death instinct. At this level, it means another word for the sexual drive. The fear of being overwhelmed by a force that threatens the ego self. And the philosophical implications for that are huge. Nietzsche would say, life is not only, as Darwin would have us, survival, it is also will to power. It's a will to, a desire to spend, expand, explore, and give of oneself, and give oneself away as well. I'll stop there. I have to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Manu. Thank you. So we open it up now to questions, to comments. Please put your mics on when you talk.
Could I just apologise for being late? I was stuck in traffic. There was a really bad smash. So I'm so sorry that you could hear me, but I presumed I would be muted straight away. So okay. I'm so sorry, Manu. And everyone for disrupting.
That's not a problem. Sorry you were in a, sorry you've had a crash.
I wasn't in the crash, thankfully. No,
sounds like you've had to
there has been a bad one, so traffic was terrible. Thank you for being so understanding.
That's okay.
Thank you, Manu. I much enjoyed, and it's good to see you again. And strange and nice to hear my name. I wanted to ask about the implications for practice, and thinking about if you were to say there's someone who's suffering and is dysregulated and whatever, cannot live a normal life, or not a normal life, a life that doesn't have an overwhelming amount of suffering. Do you think orientating the person to a trauma that is outside of the suffering within their ego is an alternative way of perceiving what you described in all of the line that has converged on the behavior rather than the line of flight?
I think we have to resist the integration as well as translation. Those are, integration is delusional. And there's a passage in Kristeva's Tales of Love, and I know that I'm not pronouncing I think Kristeva. Jana will have to correct me. She says something about we don't have to rush in and try and correct and try to integrate the person, but more following where this crisis or disturbance wants to go. Phenomenology would call it emergent phenomenon. And Deleuze, in his view of schizoanalysis, would call it following what those tiny subjectivities within us want to do. And so to accept that there are different movements and to see where they want to go. I can't say more than that, really, at this stage. For me, this is work in progress. But have a look at schizoanalysis and have a look at the fantastic work by a colleague of mine called Erin Manning, Canadian philosopher, whose book is coming next year called For the Pragmatics of the Useless. And Del and I are involved in editing a special issue of a journal on Deleuze. It's absolutely, but looked at these two things, schizoanalysis in Deleuze and Guattari, and also Kristeva, Tales of Love. Sorry for not being more specific.
No, but thank you.
May I ask a question, Manu? It's sort of, I was sort of semi-attentive. I was trying to sort of keep a reverie going as you were talking. It strikes me that a lot of what you're describing is failure to meet. And I'm wondering, it sets me off thinking, what does it mean to meet? To have a meeting, to meet up?
To be, I would say it means to be ready to be disrupted, to be taken off one center. I don't want to use the word traumatic, but it's to be open to love and hate, to be open to really to be disrupted off center. That's what on one level seduction means, to realize that there is a real other person out there means, oh my God, I am not the center of this perception. There is somebody else there. And that's traumatic. Encounter is, Peter Schmidt would say, a colleague Peter Schmidt from Austrian, is encounter. Is no picnic. Despite what the humanistic people tell you. Of course, there can be moments where we join hands and sing together.
It seems a bit like the line from Derrida that a meeting is one which puts you into question. So if I meet somebody, I'm put into question.
Yes.
My whole being is put into question.
Yes. And the same, he, again, Levinas would be another person to look for in that.
But Manu, this encountering the other that you have mentioned, isn't that exactly the moment when Orpheus turns back to look at Eurydice?
Ah, you got me there. Say a bit more.
Well, the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice that also Blanchot refers to in The Space of Literature. He has this wonderful essay, The Gaze of Orpheus.
Yes, yes.
Where he analyzes this moment in the myth. So Orpheus is this wonderful lute player, and Eurydice was dead and taken into the underworld, and he is permitted, because of his talents, to go down and bring her back on the condition that he doesn't turn to look at her all the way until they're outside. So they start going and he cannot resist the temptation, turns back to look at her. She goes back into the underworld and never to return. So Blanchot, when he takes hold of this story, he says, this is precisely the moment of the artist, because as the artist, you must turn back and look at the impossible, at the unseen. That is the source of your creative power. But this is this incredibly dark, black place that nothing can come back from. Now, I'm just wondering that in your attempt to encounter the other, isn't that what you essentially want us to do?
Which is?
Turning back to look at Eurydice.
I think yes, because previously you also said, Manu, that the other way is to perish. So if we were to listen to the siren song, we would have to have an encounter with the impossible at our own, and we would have to take the risk of perishing. So it is a dangerous place that requires a risk, and that's what Orpheus' story is all about. So he just threw himself there and he lost her, but he had the experience, and maybe that was the enigmatic message that he carried within him through her loss. So anyway, sorry, it just came to me and I didn't want to forget.
There is something so painful in that story as well for me. I can't unlock it. I have a kind of a impasse at the moment. And yet it's weird because it's so recurrent through films and operas and you name it. And Blanchot writes so beautifully about it. But I have a sort of a block, I recognize. I don't know why.
I wonder if it might connect, Manu. I was interested when you were talking about Ulysses and Odysseus and the sirens. I think maybe we're being a bit hard on Odysseus there because he's trying to get home.
Mm.
It's a homecoming that he wants. So you can sort of understand him hedging his bets and wanting the experience of the sirens, but not to be seduced by them, because his aim is to get home. Which sort of makes me think a little bit of work that you and I have done together recently regarding Heidegger and this promise of a homecoming. I just think, and I guess the Orpheus as well it's trying to get back, trying to come home. And there's a moment there, isn't there, where he fails to look forward. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Manu?
Yeah, I mean, what comes, these were actually Circe's words to Ulysses. If you listen to the song, you will lose any desire to go back to home. What it means to me is, if we take the clue from Deleuze, enough of mom and dad, enough of mommy-daddy scenarios, enough of the unconscious as a theater that repeats the same old saying that if I meet you, I love you, you love me, and can you please redeem my past? No, I can't, darling, and you can't redeem mine. So it means a move away from the excessive importance given to family. That would be my first almost reaction to that. That, okay, yes, I want to come home, but in coming home, look what happened. We have lost otherness completely. Coming home also means I come home to the very self-same, having lost the richness of the encounter. But I also existentially, viscerally, my goodness, I often dream that I'm in some city full of ruins at night, and the only thing I want to do is come back home. But I hope if I come back home that I come back enriched in some way. But I don't think Ulysses points towards that. It's more, how can I preserve myself? And I guess I'm saying with Nietzsche, self-preservation has been overrated.
Manu, there's so much here, isn't there? There's a vast amount. And, I think the stories are really powerful. The Odysseus story and the Orpheus story. And there are lots of things, aren't there? I mean, there's one is about to what extent, one is about how in one of them there is something about looking, I think as you, John, were saying, there's something about looking as opposed to listening. I'm not sure quite what to make, but they're in some ways they seem to be quite different. But maybe the important thing to say though is that the thing about Ulysses, if I remember correctly, is something about, that he will go through anything in order to get back to the people that he loves. Mm. So he will, and there's all sorts of things about how he's a master at knowing how to see. I'm sure there's lots there that he's not really kind of straightforward, that there's always something going on. He puts something on. He's good at that. So, not to say anything about what you've said, it's just, there is just so much there. But what the question I find myself left with, it must go something like this. The interactions that we're having now and that people have with each other are so complex, polyvalent, that actually there must be much in it that is enigmatic. And I wonder to what extent the idea that there is, one of the problems is that we put too much, we have too much belief, we have too much confidence in words.
Indeed, and that's why I'm often tempted to break into song, and alongside words, I think the gift of the psychotherapeutic tradition is to pay attention to unconscious communication. Not that we can claim to decode it entirely, but at least paying attention to it. And maybe that's a different type of attention. Somebody like Bolas would say, listen to the whole orchestra. Don't fixate on the solo, on the violin, on the singer. There's so much going on. Yeah.
Manu, hello. Thank you very much. Fabulous talk, really exciting and innovating. When you talk about attention, it's an interesting word, isn't it? I wonder about the inattention we pay to the past and how we experience it through the memories that constantly flow into consciousness, if you like, and how those play in the therapeutic experience, that we're sort of thrown off kilter, and our inattention and inattention to things and matters from the past find their way into the therapeutic room and into the words and the expressions and the communications from the person in front of us.
Do you see that as an obstacle to pay attention to the present? Is that what you're saying?
No, I suppose I was thinking about the word attention, and I suppose when I hear the word attention, I think of consciousness, and I think of how I try and filter and understand or interpret what you may be saying or how I may be feeling with me through conscious attention, and a kind of inattention sometimes. Perhaps a moment of rupture from sort of habitual paths we tread along can be.
That's interesting. There's a chapter in that recent book that I edited, written by Undine Smulders, and it's about daydreaming as a therapist, for example. It's a very, very beautifully written, but interesting. It's an interesting dynamic. I wonder whether too much attention has been paid to attention, too much, whether consciousness has been glorified to the point of being hypertrophied, so to speak. And whether it's interesting when things from the past suddenly come up and we're distracted, the presence of the past, particularly if it's involuntary. I mean, it's a very rich thing when that happens. Interesting. And I often struggle with these things because, as you know, I'm interested in Zen worlds in areas like that. And often the misunderstanding is you have to be meditating and be aware, but there is value in daydreaming.
Thank you.
You just mentioned Zen there, Manu.
So,
I mean, I know that a koan is something that is expressed in words, but do you see any connection between the enigmatic message and the koan?
yes. Yes, because unlike the riddle, nobody knows the answer to it. And both of them, the koan in the Zen tradition, the koan is the practitioner works on an existential enigma. And in both cases, not the decoding, but the breakthrough brings a different perspective, opens up something. I think there is. Again, this is work in progress for me. I feel underprivileged. This is a luxury to be able to speak as I think about these things. I think there is a connection. It has to be explored.
Manu, it's now time, and thank you so much for being able to speak and think in the way that you do. Thank you so much. I don't know how to, I don't think I can summarize it. I could just say I could dare, but for me, there's something about what it means to be at home and all the complexity of it, you know, that somehow there's these enigmatic signifiers, something we comes into us that we know and yet don't know, yeah? And, you know, what's the role of the psychotherapist in this, and how, you know, perhaps for some people, one can only experience when one leaves home. And yet in leaving home, unlike Ulysses, one can't return home. Yeah, that I think it isn't necessarily on. But there's then the sort of, as psychotherapists, what's our responsibility, not only for our clients, patients, but what's our responsibility for their responsibility to others, which I think is hardly looked at in most psychotherapists. Yeah? And it seems, for me, you're raising a lot of possibilities here. And what I'd say is that for a long time, I've been wanting to get back and read Robert Graves on Greek myths, and I'm going to do that after start that this evening later on. Thank you so much for that. And can we just give Manu, I don't know if you put some sound things on and give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Manu.
Thank you, Manu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Manu.
So much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for showing up.